Masamune Kadoya is a world champion, and he's one of the strongest non-legendary bladers ever, but even so, it's no secret that he lost a ton of battles. And because of this, the discourse around Masamune within the community has become very split. On one side, you have Masamune supporters who will argue that he was done dirty by the writers, and he often lost matches because of the plot, but on the other side, some people will tell you that he's just a straight-up fraud for losing so many matches, yet claiming to be number one. Now, both sides honestly bring up good points, but I'd argue it's a little bit more complicated than he was done dirty or he's just a fraud. Like, yes, he did lose a lot of matches, but with each loss, there's important context that can't be ignored. So today, we're going to go through all of Masamune's losses and give a verdict on whether the loss was fraudulent, if he was done dirty, or if it's just somewhere in between. So without further ado, let's kick things off with Masamune's first loss, which was to Gingka. He actually lost to Gingka like 50 different times in the first few episodes, but I'm going to group all of these battles together because they tell the same story. Basically, Masamune was completely outmatched. Now, losing 30 battles in a row to the same person while each battle only lasted a few seconds looks really bad. And on top of that, Gingka didn't even know how to use his new Pegasus yet, so all things considered, this looks like a pretty fraudulent set of losses for Masamune, but I don't know if I see it that way. In defense of Masamune, this is the weakest version of his character, so it's not like Gingka no-diffed peak Masamune or anything like that. Something else to mention is Jinga's still pretty strong here. Sure, he can't control Pegasus, but Pegasus can control itself, and it has a ton of power. Like, usually when bladers get new bays, they're a little bit weaker because they have to get used to it, but this version of Gingka didn't even have to battle against Masamune. It was literally just Pegasus and all of its raw power thrashing Masamune. So on face value, these losses look really bad. One could even say fraudulent, but with the context, I think these losses are fine. I mean, I didn't really expect the weakest version of Masamune to beat the legendary Bay. So, the final verdict, are these losses fraudulent? Maybe a little bit just because he lost so many times, but generally, I think it's kind of expected. So, I'd say no. Now, are all of these losses a result of the writers doing him dirty? Also no. Gingka was just stronger than him here. You can't get around that. So, this first loss is not fraudulent, and the writers didn't do him dirty either. I think this one's just normal. So now, let's move on to loss number 2, Masamune versus Chao Xin. This is the famous battle that took place on the Great Wall of China, and oddly enough, its location played a massive role in determining a winner. We were in the middle of a 50-50 clash until Masamune's side of the wall just so happened to cave in, and as a result, he lost. That's something that he straight up cannot control. I mean, even Deshayan tells Chao Xin at the end that he won by sheer luck, which could honestly be true. So, is this a fraudulent loss on Masamune's part? No. There were literally outside forces beyond his control working against him. So if anything, you could argue that his side of the wall falling is the writers doing him dirty. I disagree though, because after this he trains, he improves, and then he beats Chao Xin, fully making up for it. This loss was kind of just to set up his character growth. So my final verdict here is another normal loss. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Now let's move on to loss number 3, the Battle Royale at the Festival of Warriors against Team Excalibur. We're not going to spend too much time here, but we are going to go over it. This is technically a loss for Masamune, but he had 2 other teammates as well, so not everything is on him. In fact, I'd argue he did really well. His special move was able to pierce through the Grand Decalion, which is insanely impressive at this time. I've said it before in other videos, but the Metal series had a thing for making new characters and new special moves seem very overpowered in their introductions, and this is the first time we saw Grand Decalion. So it's very impressive for Masamune to cut through it, and for those reasons, the final verdict here is yet another normal loss. He wasn't done dirty, and him losing this match doesn't make him a fraud. They just lost to a better team at the time, Team Excalibur. Moving on, we now have one of the staple Masamune losses. When people talk about Masamune taking L's, this is one of the battles that immediately comes to mind. I'm of course talking about Masamune versus Nile. This one was a classic, it introduced us to one of the coolest side characters, and it was overall very entertaining. For Masamune though, it wasn't very great. In fact, it was so bad that my final verdict for this one is fraud. This is a fraudulent loss for Masamune in my opinion, but not for the reason you may be thinking. I'm actually not saying fraud because he lost. Nile is just a better blader than him, and I think this result was to be expected. But I am going to say fraud because of everything he did before the match. Firstly, he's always claiming number 1, which is fine, but at some point you have to back it up. And then at the press conference, he called Nile out. Then he claimed he was going to put on such an amazing performance that it would make Kyoya versus Ginga look like a game of marbles. I'm all for confidence, but if you say all this and then lose in the fashion that he did, we have the right to say fraudulent. Also, in the middle of the battle, Masamune gave up. He got down on his hands and knees and started punching the ground out of frustration. I mean, dude, after all that talk, this is a horrible look, and I'm gonna call fraud. So that's actually our first non-normal loss of this video. Pretty interesting. And once again, I would have called this one a normal loss. I'm not expecting Masamune to beat Nile, but between everything he said and how he lost, this is fraudulent. Now, let's move on to another major L in Masamune's career. I'm talking about his battle against Klaus. This one was actually a great performance on Masamune's part. I mean, I'm pretty sure Masamune got as close as you can get to winning while still losing the match. Honestly, there's not much more he could have done. I mean, he literally won the final clash of special moves, which 9 times out of 10 should win you the match, but it just so happens that his opponent is a beast. So, this isn't fraudulent for Masamune. In fact, I'd say that this might be the writers doing him a little dirty. Like, how does he get so close to winning and still not win? Yes, Klaus is a beast. He got this crazy second wind after being all but defeated. And it makes sense because his whole thing is going past the limits of a human being. But I don't know. I just can't help but feel bad for Masamune here. Like, what else was he supposed to do? But if you're not entirely convinced, I have another reason as to why this loss could be somewhat for plot. Let's just think about it. Tsubasa had to win his match. It was the conclusion to the Dark Power arc. He had to beat Wales and Sophie. So that's 1-0. Then we have Ginga versus Julian, and Ginga has to win that one. I mean, come on, main character. So that's already 2-0. That's the whole match. But this is the A block final, so we can't have it be a 2-0 sweep. It has to be close. We need it to be 2-1. So unfortunately, Masamune had to bite the bullet here and lose. So while this loss makes sense, I'd say the plot did call for Masamune to lose here. So I'd say he was done a little dirty. Like, what are the odds that his opponent could have a second wind like this? I mean, Ryuga did something similar versus Jack, but he actually can absorb power, so it makes sense. Masamune is just so unlucky that his opponent just so happened to be a beast. But anyways, let's move on to one of the most egregious losses I've ever seen in all of Beyblade, Masamune versus Selen. As for the verdict here, it could go either way. You could argue he's a fraud for losing this one, and I might agree with you, but more than that, I think the writers may have done him dirty once again. I mean, ordinarily, Selen has no business beating Masamune. She's strong, but she's just not on that level. So, it's already a bad look for Masamune to lose to someone who's not as strong as him, but it gets even worse when you consider how he lost. This guy Masamune really fell for some of the lamest tricks in the book. I mean, Selen really pointed and said, "Whoa, what's that over there?" Masamune would look, she would attack, and then he'd look back and he didn't know what was going on. I mean, dude, that's ridiculous. I mean, that is insane that he fell for this like 3 times. And for all the Masamune fans who complain that he was done dirty over the course of the series, I think I understand now. If I saw my favorite character lose like this, I don't know what I'd do. I mean, you could argue that this one is fraudulent. You could say he shouldn't be falling for this, he shouldn't be losing like this, and because he did, he's a fraud. But I think there's more to it. My thought process is maybe the writers didn't know how to get rid of Masamune before Ian, because I guess they wanted Ginga to be the first one to face Ian and figure him out along with the Cyclone. So they kind of needed Masamune out of the way. But dang, bro, at least do it in a respectable way. I mean, we're just making him look like a clown out here. So yeah, this could fall under both categories, but I think it's mainly the writers doing him dirty. They needed him to lose. Selen wasn't really strong enough to beat him normally, so they had to come up with something. And at the very least, I guess it was kind of funny. So there's that. But anyways, I'm going to chalk this one up as the writers doing him dirty once again. But now let's move on to Masamune versus Zio. This was actually his last major loss of Metal Masters, and it came in the World Championship Finals. And my thoughts here is yet another case of Masamune being done dirty. Now, with that being said, I'm not mad that he lost. I'm okay with Zio taking this one. But even Masamune's biggest haters have to acknowledge that he canceled his special move in the final clash. I mean, Masamune was going in at full power, but once Zio said that Toby will die if he loses, Masamune's lightning sword flash stopped. I guess Masamune was shocked, or maybe he even pulled back so Toby wouldn't die. We don't really know. But either way, he canceled his move, and then Zio used his special move at full power, and he won. So I think this whole situation is the writers kind of doing him dirty, because there were factors affecting the match that were way outside of Masamune's control. I mean, the whole Toby thing in general made Masamune's loss pretty much inevitable, and then we have him canceling his special move. Look, a lot of people argue that Masamune would have won had he kept his special move going. Now, I don't exactly know about that. Zio's magnetic needle storm was massive, and there is definitely a world where Masamune kept his move going, but still gets overpowered by Zio anyways. But we'll never know that for sure, and the fact that Masamune didn't even get the chance to use his full power in this battle, due to reasons outside of his control, makes me think he was done dirty. So now let's move on to our next entry. We're actually jumping to Metal Fury, and we're going to cover two battles at the same time, which are Masamune versus King, and Masamune versus Chris. I grouped these two together because both of these losses tell the same story. It's literally just Masamune losing to bladers who are stronger than him. That's all it is. He does a pretty good job to compete with both of them, but at the end of the day, they're just both stronger than he is. So I wouldn't say any of these losses are fraudulent. I wasn't really expecting him to beat these high-level legendary bladers, but at the same time, he also wasn't done dirty. Chris and King are just stronger than Masamune, so these losses are normal. There's not really much else to talk about here, and just like that, we've covered all of Masamune's losses. So, overall, was he a fraud, or was he done dirty? I'd say neither. Now, there are definitely instances of Masamune getting done dirty, and there are instances of him being a fraud. We just spent the whole video going over that, but I gotta say, most of his losses make sense. He was simply outmatched most of the time. The Festival of Warriors, Nile, King, Chris, you could even make arguments for Klaus and Zio. I mean, these characters are all just kind of stronger than Masamune was. So, my final verdict is neither. I don't think he's a fraud, and I don't think he was done dirty as often as people claim. But that's just my opinion, so be sure to comment what you think down below as well. If you disagree, let me know why. Let me know any other videos you want to see here on the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.